द वे फॉरवर्ड इज ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਯੂਐਸ ਕਨਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਦੇ ਰੋਲ ਦੀ। ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁਝ ਰੋਲ ਅਲਾਉਡ ਹੈਗਾ ਯੂਐਸ ਕਨਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਅੰਡਰ ਯੂਐਸ ਦੀ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਵਿੱਚ, ਯੂਐਸ ਦੇ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਦਾ। इस इंपॉर्टेंट इशू ते गल करने वास्ते आज असी आमंत्रित किया है दो उगे हुए अटर्नीज कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन लॉ दे मिस्टर अर्नेस्ट बोनाकोरी एंड मिस्टर जॉन विटरेली। मिस्टर अर्नेस्ट बोनाकोरी, मिस्टर विटरेली, you are very welcome. Thank you very much for taking out this time to speak with us.
Thank you, Harjot. Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Mr. Vitarelli, before we go to the debate of how much should we allow religion to guide our public policy in this country, we would like to first understand what exactly are the founding principles which guide our constitution on this. Can you tell us what is a secular state? What is the concept of freedom of religion and establishment of religion in the US Constitution?
America is special. Always been special. And the reason America has always been special is the separation of church and state. It's the fundamental difference between this country and virtually any other country in the world. Sure, there's less religious and more secular states, but at the end of the day, in Western culture at least, where religion has been integrally tied to the state and to the progress of society, that clean break made America different and great. And why did it happen? It happened because of religious oppression. It happened because, because there was a new country. It happened for a wide variety of reasons. And let me put it this way. The miracle that it happened kind of doesn't matter how it happened, but the fact that it happened was what's special. And it took hold in Pennsylvania, and it took hold in the Constitutional Convention. And the separation of church and state asked for two things constitutionally. One, the no establishment clause, which means that, of course, that the government itself cannot endorse any single religion or, in my opinion, even religion at all. And then the free exercise clause, which is the second part, which is very different. It allows Americans specifically to exercise religion in any way that they want. Now, that of course bumps up with the establishment clause when it comes to the mix of government and religion sort of coexisting, but those two things sort of define how America has that wall separating church and state, if that answers your question. To start us off?
Definitely it does. Mr. Bonacory, can you tell us, our viewers, a little more about what were the circumstances in which such a stance was taken in the founding of our constitution? Because we understand at that time when this constitution was adopted, all 13 states had very strict religious tests, but we do not see any mention of God, Jesus, or anything religious in the constitution. Can you tell us why was such verbiage not used?
Yes. The Constitution, the convention to ratify the Constitution was, don't forget, a horse trading, whereby the founding fathers and the framers were coming from the different states, and they all had their own particular views on what should be in there. The concept of federalism, of course, was very strong, and they felt, in order to get the Constitution ratified, that religious matters were better left, or have to have been left to the states to determine and have dominion over that. As you had mentioned, several of the the state's constitutions already had tests whereby you had to be a Christian in order to hold office. Exactly the opposite of the federal constitution. And so the founders, they did not want to, first of all, they had to ensure this idea of federalism. States had the right over religion, and also they were all Christian and mostly Protestant, and they didn't want one particular sect of Protestantism to have control over the others. So as a compromise, they decided that they had to have no aspect of religion, very little, in the original Constitution. Don't forget that the First Amendment came a little bit later, when the Bill of Rights were added. Before that, there was only one reference that said there shall be no religious test to hold office, and there was a mention where when the president can either veto a bill or not, he has the right to not work on a Sunday. And that, of course, I would consider that as a nod to the day of Sabbath, the day of rest. But other than those few references, there's very little. There's no reference to God. There's no reference to Jesus Christ in the Constitution.
Mr. Vitarelli, I understand that there would be this issue with satisfying everyone, because there were like 13 different states, and that might have been an issue. But do you think it was something intentional, something deliberate, to avoid any reference? Christ is a common word, Lord. The way the Germanic preamble starts, it says, aware of our responsibility towards God and mankind. It does not contain a single word at its starts. Any legal document at that time, usually used to have this verbiage. Is there any specific reason you think the founders wanted to keep God or religion completely separate from the government?
Of course, they had every reason to keep it separate. There was no reason to entangle the two things. The classic statement, I suppose, is that it's better for both government and religion to keep them separate. Government has its render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto the Lord what is the Lord's. They're two separate and parallel things. Now, there's no escaping religion from the person, but there is escaping religion from the entity of government. And there was a very specific reason they did it, because there was religious persecution in England, which is how they ended up here in the first place, running away to be free. So the question then becomes, in what sense can we be religious without being specific? Sure, there were a lot of Christians back then. Sure, there are a lot of Christians now. But in no way is the country Christian. We all know the Treaty of Tripoli, and how there was this is not a Christian nation, and all that kind of stuff was out there. And if we were to attach ourselves to some religious doctrine, dogma, stripe, however we may talk about it, the degree of problem hoisted upon the government for no reason, for one particular sex reason, does not help the whole. And as a whole, the country is founded on greater principles than the particular actions of the founders of the day. So I don't say, did Thomas Jefferson go to church? Did he have a good church life? Was he a valued Christian? Did he write, in Christian? I don't ask those questions, because what it was then is different than what it is now. It's becoming a more perfect union. And in perfecting it, we perfect the First Amendment, which separates church from state intentionally, and still allows each person to freely exercise religion. I have a lot of points about how that works itself out, but I believe maybe later we'll talk about that.
Mr. Banakari, Mr. Vitarelli raised a very important point, and I think it's a fundamental point we should address because that will determine everything else that we're talking about. Is the US Constitution based on Christian principles? That's a debate, and as Mr. Vitarelli mentioned, in 1897, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams signed this Treaty of Tripoli, and it was ratified 10 years later by the Congress, and that Congress had almost all the founding fathers who had initially developed that Constitution. And Article 11, I believe, of that treaty stated very clearly the government of United States is not in any way founded upon the Christian religion. How do you explain that?
You'll have to understand the circumstances, Harjot, of what was going on at the time. The Treaty of Tripoli was made in response to the fact that the Barbary Coast and the Barbary pirates, who happened to be Muslim, all along North Africa, they were confiscating ships and enslaving U.S. servicemen and capturing them. And John Adams, the president at the time, and Thomas Jefferson were besides themselves as to what to do, and so they were bargaining with the Pasha of Tripoli to say, we understand that you're a Muslim nation. We're not a Christian nation in this, but you also have to look at the whole context of the quote. It's
Mr. Banakari, we'll continue this conversation after a short break. ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਦ ਵੇ ਫੋਰਵਰਡ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ US ਦੀ ਕਨਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਦੇ ਰੋਲ ਦਾ। Mr. Banakari, before going to the break, you were telling us about the circumstances in which that treaty was entered into. Are you saying that was a concession made by founding fathers out of fear or for some reasons?
Well, I don't think it was out of fear, but they were trying to stop this piracy from happening to
but they did not mean what they said?
Well, first of all, they were dealing with a nation that there were no gray areas. They were Muslims who believed that if you were not a Muslim, you had to be made war against, and they had never made any type of. The Muslims of North Africa had been fighting with Christian nations for 1,000 years, and so Thomas Jefferson needed to say something in the treaty that I don't agree with, and I think it was as a concession to the Muslim leaders of the time. You'll notice, Harjot, that first of all, it didn't stop the piracy, and the U.S. had to send some greater military force, and a second treaty was entered into after the Americans had established their dominance, and there was no such language in the second treaty. So, yes, I do believe that it was placed in there as a sort of an olive branch to be able to deal with a nation who otherwise would not have made any such treaty with a Christian nation.
Mr. Vitarelli?
Isn't that why America is really different? Isn't the fact that we say these things, and we have some good actions, some bad actions, but we say these things and these things push forward. The thing that pushes forward is the separation of church and state. The thing that pushes forward is that it's not a Christian nation. No matter how many Christians there are in this nation, it's just simply not. We're here, where we are right now, is the most diverse community in the world. I mean, it's, 10, 15 square miles of 700 nations, 400 religions, or some crazy number like that, because America has no fealty to any particular stripe of religion, if we were to start to look at what Christianity are we supposed to follow? Are we supposed to follow snake handlers? Are we supposed to follow people who speak in tongues? Are we supposed to follow Catholics? Are we supposed to follow evangelicals? Which Christian am I supposed to follow? Because most of them I don't like. I was raised in one, and I have a strong affinity to my Catholic upbringing. We're both Italian, and it's just an inheritance, if you will, that brings us into the larger world of spiritual living. But which one should I follow? Which one should lawmakers follow? Should they follow the one that doesn't make any sense to 90% of the other religions? Or should they follow the most popular one? The difference with America is that it doesn't matter. That it's separate, that it's different, that it shouldn't be one particular thing. We can argue about this later, but you can believe how you want to believe and think how you want to think. But the government itself, which is different, very different from the states, and has dominion over the states in the legal context, has no religion and should not have a religion. Which one?
But Jonathan, wouldn't you agree that historically speaking, the nation was founded on principles of Judeo-Christian principles, and the examples can be found in the system of government. There are passages of the Bible that people of the late 1700s knew, and it was culturally acceptable, and most persons in America at that time were Christian of some denomination. Certainly, the founding has a basis in Christianity. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree that the founding of the philosophy of the morality of the country is Judeo-Christian. So I ask the same question. Should we follow the Judeo laws? Should we follow the Christian laws? Because they diverge fairly quickly. They become very different things. And in that mesh in and of itself, we are already sort of a mix. Because as much as they're similar, they are still different.
Let me jump in. Mr. Bunkari, you are stating that the laws, the government, the way it's structured, it is based on the Christian principles. Now, many people in the Islamic world make this argument against democracy. They say in democracy the sovereign is the people, whereas in the under Islamic religion the sovereign has to be God, right? How do you see that in Christianity? In Christianity, isn't God still the sovereign?
Well, you can, as a Christian, one believes that Christ is the Savior, God. That Catholics believe in the Trinity, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit being one God. But that is a help me out here, Jonathan.
Look, the idea of an overlording God can take a few different manifestations. Now, there's the general God, right? Which is, there's a spiritual world. There's an untapped world out there that has no distinction, right? It lords over all of us, if you will. But then we get into specific religions. The Catholic religion is very specific. I was taught very specific things as a child. I went to church and did all the sacraments and that stuff. The Muslim religion, very different. The Jewish religion, very different. Here in Queens, the 300 religions are all different. And this leads to the problem of where does the country unify? Now, if the country's going to unify over a nondescript, undefinable thing like the energy of the world, or God, or our Creator, or whatever it might be, as opposed to Jesus and the Trinity, then you have a very different world than Jesus and the Trinity. I earlier in the green room was quoting Joseph Campbell, who said it was funny to wake up in Japan where there was no Garden of Eden, and that's very telling. It's a very overlording principle in Christianity, the Garden of Eden and and the devil and the knowledge and all. I won't get into the story, but it distinguishes that stripe from the general. There's a spirituality in the world. There's a force that we can't really explain, that doesn't belong in government.
What I'm trying to understand is that the departure from religion, right, is that you see that as a compromise because there's so many different kinds of people and what to do, or Thomas Paine said the cause of America is the mankind's cause, right? And in that spirit, I think it's a development for human civilization that you create a government, right, which does not inhibit or promote any particular religion, any particular kind of people, any particular people, but let everyone live with the freedom and liberty that U.S. Constitution promises, that this country promises.
In America, one of the great sayings is your right to throw your fist extends until it hits my nose. Right? You can punch all you want, but as long as you when you hit me, then you've crossed the line.
Exactly.
How can you be America without allowing everybody and everything? Now, that comes with good and it comes with bad. But once you start parsing that out as a government, we can all see how quickly it becomes ridiculous. There's not a choice to be made. There's not a sort of loyalty to give to one or the other, and then you end up in a place where you have to start to decide between the government and God. When you were spiritual, you don't have to choose government or God. You can choose to be government and make your decisions on that.
We will discuss this further after a short break. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ The Way Forward. The Way Forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। The battle between this how much religion should have a role in our public policy is not new. Even in 1800, when Jefferson challenged Adams for the presidency, he was saying Jefferson is going to take your Bibles away, right? That was his position. So people have always been divided on how much religion should be allowed in our government, in our public policy. But there are specific instances which seem to steer the debate away, in my view, from the founding principles. That there's something we need to talk about. Mr. Bonacry, I would like to ask you, when the words "under God" were added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. It was written in 1892. It did not have the words "under God." When "under God" was adopted, do you think that violates the founding principles of establishment clause?
It's interesting, Harjot. That was a time in America after World War II, the baby boomers in the 50s. There was a tremendous turn toward faith, toward piety. The attendance in churches throughout the nation went up dramatically.
Yeah, even the National Prayer Day of 1952, that was
Right.
around that period as well.
That was Eisenhower who started the
Billy
national,
Graham.
and Billy Graham who
He's there
became,
always. Yeah.
started to have prominence, and with Eisenhower he began a relationship with presidents of the United States.
And the Hiltons.
The Hilton,
Yes, the hotel people.
hotel people.
They put up the first prayer breakfast. They gave them free lodging for 500 people to make that happen, to immerse commerce and religion together, which is, I find, highly problematic in the American experience.
And you can't deny how these religious figures have, people like Pat Robertson, they have turned into billionaires
Sure.
over the years, right? All right, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the motto of the United States was changed from e pluribus unum, right? From many one, to
In God we trust.
in God we trust, and it was added to
Was that a contradiction to the founding principle?
Yes.
well.
Same answer.
I guess I should say no, since I'm on the other side of the debate. You know, Eisenhower felt that the freedom that we have in the United States it was the result of justice and a faith in God or a supreme being. You know, he was a very religious man, Eisenhower. And in fact, although he had been religious his entire life, it wasn't until after he became president that he was baptized. And so, certainly, he felt, and Congress at the time, because it was a bipartisan vote in Congress to make that the national motto, they felt that and I think certainly after winning World War II, and the zeitgeist of the times was such that you know, America's power was rising, and you know, the supreme nation of the world, that it was sort of a hearkening back to a founding on faith. I don't think it was in contradiction to the founding fathers, because there was never an absence of faith. There were never an absence of religion. There were different degrees. You know, some were more pious than others of the founding fathers.
I have to disagree.
Well, you know, you're familiar with the movement of deism, which it was
God does not interfere in.
right. It's just God is just all being set the universe in motion and doesn't interfere with day-to-day lives. Yes, there was certainly some degree to that, and we can discuss who was more.
But aren't we
religious?
currently in a state of predeterminism? Isn't it since George W. Bush at least, where people have where evangelicals and Protestants have moved to the idea that God has predetermined all things, and therefore your actions are meaningless in this world, thereby dropping the good works doctrine, where the goodness of humanity counts, and all we have is we've been predetermined, which I find to be so highly offensive to the American experience. I don't even know how to address the idea of that.
As a Christian myself, Jonathan, I would disagree with that. We have free will, and God has given us free will, the ability to choose between right and wrong. So
is the
You know,
Constitution.
that's why it's very important to underline this fact. This Constitution that we have is in complete departure from any religious agreements or disagreements, example of which we are seeing right
Which
now.
is the emptiness that he just talked about.
Yeah.
There is an absence of religion. There's a specific absence of religion. It's an intentional and growing absence of religion. Religion being kept aside from government. Again, on a parallel track, depending on who you are, you can follow it as you like. You can follow the Judeo model. You can follow the Christian Christian model. You could follow the Catholic, whatever.
Yeah, Mr. Vitarelli, we'll come to that later, and particularly in the context of George Bush's faith-based initiative. But again, I've talked about the Breakfast Prayer, 1952. Then 1954, we talked about the Pledge of Allegiance. Something else happened in 1956. In God We Trust. It was put on our currency, and it was put on our public institutions. What do you think about that?
So, In God We Trust was a national fervor. And I don't think, personally, we should guide the country on national fervors. We've had lots of national fervors, lots of religious fervor in different
I'm sorry,
times.
when you say national fervor, is it a religious fervor?
The fervor for that phrase, as describing the country, became widespread acceptance. Now, it was different and a break from where we started, and it was 150 years separated from where we started, and because it caught the nation's interest, I don't find that a sufficient reason to change the sort of foundations of the country. Sure, to make actions, to make laws, and to change things, national fervor matters. For example, there's a national fervor on gun regulation that I think should take hold, but it has nothing to do with this other stuff.
But Jonathan, isn't it easy to say that today in our secular, we're growing more secular in our country today, perhaps as a result of political correctness, but also perhaps as a nod to the various faiths and the awakening that each person and each faith and no faith also has a value and should be respected. But isn't it easy to say that today based on the culture that we live in today than
yes.
Congress voted to make that the national model. The representatives of the states, indeed, by a I don't know what the vote was, but it was obviously a majority vote.
And it was a Democratic Congress at that time.
Yeah.
President Eisenhower was Republican.
There's no...
Yeah. You know, what I see, the problem is, you see, there's some fundamentals of the Constitution, right, which have been laid down in various laws. We've seen various Supreme Court decisions. We saw the Lemon case. Now let's talk about this faith-based initiative of George Bush, right? After that started, it has been growing. In '96, they said start federal funding of religious organizations, charitable organizations, as much as secular organizations, right?
Yes.
Now, when you are giving funds, I'm talking about practical problems. When you are giving federal funding, state funding to any organization, there is a probability of misuse, right? And then there's an oversight. When you start doing that oversight, isn't that excessive entanglement of government with religion? Isn't that exactly what the Supreme Court held in so many cases, that there should not be an excessive entanglement?
Well, those organizations are asking for the funds, so they better expect to have oversight over them.
So Catholic hospitals should do abortions? Well, because that's the national standard, and they're taking the money, and once they take the money, they have to stop. But you don't. But do you believe that? I believe that. Do you believe that?
No, I don't.
Right. See, this is where the break happens. When the religious expectation is supposed to supersede the governmental need. The government puts its laws on and gives its money. Should we give not religious schools no money, Catholic hospitals no money, Catholic charities no money, because they insist on things that are anti-United States government?
Well, the criteria for these organizations for receiving funds is that they may not do something that is inherently religious. So they can't take the money and pray. They can't take the money and proselytize with it. But they can feed the poor and house the homeless and and often don't forget, George Bush started that, I think he said in 96, at least back in Texas it started when he was governor there. It's still going on.
Yeah.
These faith-based initiatives, and it was expanded under President Obama, and the names have been changed. He added like a commission to oversee it, but these programs work because these organizations are good at.
And people are religious. People are religious fundamentally.
I'm sorry.
In some way.
Let me make this clear that we are not attacking any particular party or any particular president for this. What we are talking about the direction in which the country is going. 96, it was under Clinton that this program was expanded, right? So, but my concern remains the way you said that they are supposed to do these things. What if they do something else, and then there is oversight? And for oversight is excessive entanglement of government with religion. We'll continue this after a short break. ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। The Way Forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। So if we talk about how much we should allow religion to guide our public policy, right? Now there's a huge debate around abortion in this country, right? I think it should be an individual choice, right? Lots of people make that choice not to have abortions, and some people have liberty to make a choice that they choose to have abortions. Should this policy be guided by some people's religious faith?
I believe that it is not a religious debate. Certainly, religious faith says that life begins at conception. But me personally, I don't believe it's a religious debate. I believe that abortion is wrong because it is an innocent life, and that life, the right of that life to exist and to continue trumps a woman's decision on what to do with her body. That's what I believe.
But do you think it's
even if she's going to die, even if she was raped?
But Mr. Vitarelli,
there's more.
Mr. Vitarelli, the question is this:
Yes.
Is the policy guided by some people's religious beliefs?
Of course it is. There's no scientific standard proof evidence that the day of conception, the moment of conception, which could be
No, but there are
that there's a life.
There are heartbeats.
The heartbeat doesn't beat the next day.
Okay.
The heartbeat doesn't
in a few days
beat
it does.
So then at conception we can have the day after pill because there's no heart beating. The problem is,
where would you draw the line? That line is changing.
That line is not changing.
It's getting.
It's not changing.
The viability of a fetus out of the womb is getting less as terms of the youth of the fetus, the youth of the baby. It's getting less and less, and it can survive more and more out of the womb. How are you going to draw an arbitrary line there?
What arbitrary line? There's 10 gazillion snowflake babies in the world. Right? You call them babies, ready to be adopted. Is somebody going to adopt them? These two-cell things? Nobody's going to adopt them because there's not a person there. There's a science experiment there. There's two cells rubbing together there. There's nothing built. There's nothing grown.
When Roe versus Wade was decided in the 70s, we're 40 years beyond that in terms, 50 years beyond that in terms of medicine.
Yep.
And they said anything beyond the first trimester, unless the health of the mother is at stake. But nowadays, with today's medicine, we know that the first trimester being 3 months. I think the heartbeat is in like 12 days or something like that after conception. So, to me, that's an arbitrary line.
Look, there's a law that's being proposed right now where ectopic pregnancies should be reinserted. Now let's just talk about the insanity, the utter and unmitigated insanity of that. Let's talk about the unmitigated insanity of having a father.
But
How much am I supposed to say here?
Ectopic pregnancies are can't in nature they can't those fertilized eggs will not survive.
But if we're talking about Christian Science stuff, then how are we having any of this conversation? Because once you're in Christian Science, you're in a different world altogether.
Without going too much into one particular issue, our topic today is it guided by faith, or is it are you saying just it's a society's interest to protect the weak?
The history of the abortion debate shows that it's guided, it's grounded in religion. You can say whatever you want about the progress of science and medicine, but it's grounded fundamentally in religion. There's a belief that conception is life, and that the rights are the same as any other living outside the world person, and I disagree.
Let's agree to disagree. How about the opposition to legislation on climate change? Is there some people's faith which again is coming between?
It's interesting now. Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, now says that pollution and a failure to recognize climate change is a sin. I don't think he's come out actually, but he's implied that in his recent
he's
writings.
at least accepted that it's man-made.
Yes, and to be and to not care about it, to not care about the environment, or it's wrong as a Christian, as a Catholic, not to I suppose agree with the precepts of man-made global warming.
I can't quite fathom how a Christian or a Catholic could not, in every sense, protect the earth as God's creation. However, I don't find myself using that as my guidance for it.
Yes.
I use science as my guidance for it, because government, God's not going to solve this problem for us, and if you're a fatalist that way and you believe he is, I think that's not how government should run. If government wants to approach climate change in any way that makes sense, it can only be science-based. And if you disregard that for religion, for some ethereal thought of what's guiding the world, then you are not going to get to protecting what God said you should protect, which is the earth that he created. I mean, I don't really think about it that way, but if you go with the doctrine, how can you not be there? I don't understand not being there, even a little.
Mr. Vitarelli, should an individual or an agent of the government be allowed to say no to somebody for a wedding cake or a wedding license based on their faith as against to the law of the land?
Wedding licenses and cakes are very different things, because the government is involved in licensing and cakes are bakers. People can hate anybody. It's America. You get to hate people, and we get to not go to your business. Because who wants to go to a hater? But the government cannot distinguish in the licensing.
But the Civil Rights Act created some barriers to what you can say no, who you can say no to, right?
Well, isn't that then the free exercise of the faith of the baker? The First Amendment, doesn't the baker have the right to say no, whether or not it's a bigoted action? There's no discriminating against those. There's no discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation in this country, race, age, sex. But doesn't the baker who has a religious belief that it's inappropriate to make a cake for a lesbian couple have the right to do that?
As long as he's not licensed like a pharmacist or a doctor or a school or taking money from the government. If he's private unto himself and doing nothing, that's different.
Mr. Vitarelli started this evening with something. He says, "You are free to punch it as long as it does not hurt my nose." That has been the constitutional position in this country. I understand when Mormons wanted to enter polygamy, the court said, "Yeah, that is your belief, but it hurts the society." So for the health of the society, and I don't know if this saying no to anyone on your belief or for a class of people is healthy for the society. We are running out of time, and I would like you to ask you, this current atmosphere where there is more and more reference to religion in public speeches, in appointments of judges, in appointments of pastors to the government, is that something you see as violative of our founding principles, or you think
yes,
you see that as violation? How do you see that, Mr. Bonacori?
Well, America has always had a religious faith, traditionally. So no, I don't believe that it's adverse to our history or adverse to our
And you don't see there's too much of entanglement of religion or into religion?
No.
All right. That was our show today. Mr. Bonacori, Mr. Vitarelli, thank you very much for talking to us. Thanks for this lively debate, and it was an important topic. To see Vekte Raho, the way forward.